Okay. So this is June 20, a meeting of the Governance Working Group. My name is Rich Jensen. I'll facilitate for the next 55 minutes. I see we have Steve Henley present, Bill Swan, Daryl Neudorf, Gary Coulter. Will you be able to scribe, Gary?
Yes.
Great. Fabian is on the call and Ian Bloom. I will share our...
May I scribe right into the working group agenda?
I think that's the best, sure.
All right.
Okay, great. Fabian says he'll be here for 30. So let me get that up and shared. I guess my question to everybody on the call first is, has everyone had a chance to look at the governance charter? Is there anyone that hasn't looked at the governance committee charter, which is a document that I believe came out of the governance committee? Ian, you might have the best story. I think you've had the best information about this document so far.
Nick Main is the owner and author.
Okay. Did Kenny, did the board ever see a version of the charter?
Yeah, it was included in an agenda that went out for a board meeting, I think, towards the end of last year.
Okay, but it never, the idea of the committee and having Kenny chair the committee, that was engaged as board business, and it's in the minutes, and you cited it last time. I think it's December 4.
Kenny was the chair of the governance committee, but in the charter and in the board resolution, it did not specify that the VP of governance must be the chair of the governance committee.
But it didn't specify, but he did have that post as...
Yes, he did.
And you attended, I think you were present for that first meeting. I only came in with the second meeting myself. But with that first meeting, I don't think Kenny was on the call, but, and so he, just to get into the details of the formality, I believe Nick was deputized to run the meeting. And then by the time of the next meeting, Kenny had departed. So we kind of through that, we got a near miss at getting a charter document in front of the board to guide the committee. Is that a fair assessment, Ian?
I think it actually was put to a board resolution, but not all of the board members had reviewed the charter. So it was pushed off to another meeting and hasn't been voted on yet.
Okay. Is there anyone who doesn't understand this this journey? Speak up now. Okay, I'm sorry, guys. I'm sometimes very awkward with getting the screen shared and so forth. I'm going to try to, first I'll drop the link to the charter that we're talking about, its present form. I'll copy that into our chat. Fabian, I see that you said you have not. That means you're saying you have not read the charter. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, thanks, Fabian. There is the link to the charter with accumulated comments since about January of this year. Ian, I'm going to rely on you. Personally, I've glanced at the charter. I've thought about it a little bit. I may have some additional comments, but I really look forward to any comments that you or Bill might have about it as a document. If there's particular areas that need attention, anything that's really lacking, I'll let you respond to that question.
I think the only thing that's really lacking is the composition of the committee. Who's going to serve on the committee? Who the chair is going to be, and also who the VP of governance is going to be. But the charter itself looks pretty good to me, and has had practically no changes since when it was first drafted by Nick Main.
I did have some clarifying questions that I put in there today.
I mean, some of the details in this charter, that it names RChain Europe and Ella, and some things that have changed, but I think they're only minor. I mean, maybe the charter goes into a little more detail than it needs to, but I think it's okay as is.
I think, Rich, one thing that I just wanted to be clear on was that from when I read the purpose and objectives and the scope and constraints, is that this committee is, like it says, it recommends and proposes. It has no operational accountability. And it's really measures only its own governance team's performance. I think I read that pretty clearly in the scope and constraints. I just want to be, I guess, be sure that that's in fact the intention.
You're muted, Rich. Rich, you're muted.
I think he's speaking with the mouse, if you follow the mouse movements. You're still muted.
Rich, we can't hear you.
Ian, did you?
There it is.
There we go.
Woo, guys.
Our technology is so amazing.
It was hidden up in the scroll bar. I couldn't find it anywhere. So to respond to your comment, Bill, I'll look at my reading was that the governance committee might be drawn into measurement of other committees. It was kind of by invitation.
I can imagine that.
Yeah, I can also imagine the board giving more power and asks of this committee, for particular things, tasks.
Bill, can you help guide me to the particular?
Yeah. You're right. Wait, go back down.
Okay.
Go back down. Well, I mean, you could start at the top, but that's
Okay.
all right. Go back down. I mean, because that's where I was. Okay. So right there, the team. They recommend, they propose governance design changes. Next paragraph, the team has no operational accountability, for executive functional decisions or judgments. They may review. I imagine they may, recommend things like this. But I mean, I guess in my mind, I'm just getting myself clear that okay, this group really does, it has oversight, it advises, it recommends, it proposes, things like this. But it's just being clear that the group doesn't have a true functional responsibility. Say if you had in a corporate organization where it's like, look, this is the group that's responsible for these functions, and they darn well better get it done. Otherwise, we're going to make changes to the personnel that's in that group. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And part of me, when further on down, we were looking at the members, and I also put in a question about, okay, well, how right now certainly we're looking just for volunteers, of who wants to serve, but I think we do need to get some clarity in there. Is okay, how does someone become on the committee? What's their length of term on the committee? Is there, if the committee is only responsible for reviewing its own performance, well, how does the board or the membership or another entity within it say, hey, wait, we're dissatisfied with the performance of the committee? And so how would they be removed? Because in some regards, this is if we're looking at this committee to be the first committee that really needs to come about and be functional before other committees can come into play for the co-op, then it's got a positional responsibility, at least, to function well. And so if there was a dissatisfaction with the performance of the governing committee, what happens? Do you get what I'm thinking
Definitely.
about?
No, I think that's an excellent question. I think there are a couple of measures before that question.
Yep.
Because it is, we've kind of inherited a document, so we've inherited a philosophy.
Yep.
And out of being respectful for whatever legacy produced this, and whether it was, I don't, and again, maybe Ian has insight whether this was, whether this is basically a product consistent with Nick's training, or whether this came from more directly, was consonant with, for example, the governance conference that I know some people on this call may have taken part in, that I did not take part in the spring of 2018. It may have been that this was an expression, I'm not sure where it comes. So just respecting what's arrived here, I hear two particular things. One in your comment. One is that yes, there's a formal definition in this description of the function of the committee, and that's one comment you made. And then the other is, okay, well, how operationally, if there's a problem with this committee, how do we deal with it? So
right.
parsing those two concerns. Going to the first, I accept this. I guess I read this a little more generously, in that, I guess how I read this is, there's that one sentence where it said, by exception, the team has no operational accountability for executive functional decisions or judgments. And the team there means the governance committee. And basically, that's a definitive statement implying that operational accountability for executive functional decisions and judgments are elsewhere in the organization. That's the executive committee or the president, right, or
audit
staff or audit function.
Right.
So that's elsewhere. So that's this is the committee. This is like the club of the umpires, not the players.
Good analogy.
So this is defining, okay, what is who's on the field, the umpires on the field, and what is their job? It's not to play, but we're going to keep our eyes out, and then we may get called into situations, or the governance committee. And so that's where I saw, by exception, may review governance decisions or disputes as part of an audit. So someone may call, and an audit, I think an audit is, I read that pretty generously. It's not just a financial audit, but it's, hey, which is the body that comes in to look at a situation, because our rules, how do we interpret these rules? So it's got a little bit of the Justice Department, it's a little bit of the court.
Right. So if that's the intention, I'm not necessarily seeing teeth.
Right. Well, but again, there's two sets of teeth we're talking about here.
Yeah.
There's are there enough teeth in, because what is being described, and there is that there's that RChain chart. I don't know if that's how we say it, or RICA, or
yeah, I saw it.
Yeah, which is pretty detailed with who's got accountability in which areas. So that's a little bit toothsome, because it's in this document that RChain chart is spelled out, right? And then one has to assume that, just like right now, we don't have a governance committee, but we have a board, and we have a president, and we have staff, and things happen. So, things can get done.
Mm-hmm.
The question is whether there's a couple questions. Once the governance committee, there's another component that's here after the draft, which was GP 001, which was basically which responded, and Ian, correct me if you feel like I'm going off on a tangent or not representing correctly, but GP 001, which is another document, is more toothsome, and follows from IOB 4, which was passed by the members, basically saying, hey, the members, through the governance committee, or the members, when there's an important decision, it doesn't go through the staff alone. There's some factor, and that could be a decision. What is the mechanism for deciding that something is important, and goes through the governance committee process, rather than just being an executive function by the people that are employed and directed to be the executives.
The GP 001 was a lot about transparency with the membership, and also notification,
right,
to the membership. And what we were talking about earlier, what happens if this governance committee doesn't perform well? I'm just thinking, practically speaking, if the VP of governance is mandatory on this committee, and the VP of governance is appointed by the board, so the board could oust the VP of governance. And then also, I think, just winging this, my opinion, the chair of the governance committee should probably be ratified by the board. And as for the other members, I don't think the board should have a lot of say-so about the composition of the committee.
The key stakeholder here, I think that's team and roles. So chair convenes, represents, facilitates, provides arbitration and priority setting. It may delegate activity to other members acting as guides on a particular agenda topic.
And there's also an observer. There's like besides the VP of governance being an observer to the board, I think there's a second observer role as well.
Board liaison. One member will provide representation. Well, that may or may not be what you were describing. One member will provide representation of board interests having a seat as an observer, that's it, on board meetings. The board liaison member or the chair will normally represent the governance committee at the RChain co-op board. Governance committee representation will normally be required ad hoc at other meetings, such as audit, nominations, compensation committee. So stretching that umpire, this is the committee that has is watching over the game in all the other committees. To be there, I guess, to have some institutional basis for if the execution of those committees gets into somewhere where now members are saying, hey, that wasn't a fair decision, or that's not what's intended by that committee. By having the governance committee observation process in there, there's some basis to then, that might be where, say, nominating committee might have met in such a way that somebody wants to have an audit of the process of the nominating committee, and it would be they would invite the governance committee in to audit nominating committee processes. That's how I kind of read that exceptionality statement that Bill started with here. Does that make sense? Have I said something that's clear there?
Yeah, I think this is helping. I think so. When we get further down into that RChain document, and it talks about near the end of it, it's like work with the HR function to review and develop disciplinary, equal opportunity, and affirmative action policies. And so when I think of disciplinary policies, naturally, I'm thinking strictly of staff. But within the co-op, if we're inclusive of members and their behaviors within the co-op, well, that certainly extends that.
The board, there's already a board resolution ratifying a disciplinary process for members. So that's in the GitHub repo for legal docs. It's the disciplinary policy, but it calls for a disciplinary committee, which we've never created.
Sounds like a good committee.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's a policy, but at present without a committee to exercise it, which we'd assign it. I suppose it could go on an ad hoc basis to the governance committee or an other appropriate committee.
So I guess, again, what I'm seeing is a lot of, okay, it's advisory, it's oversight, it recommends, but when I get to the word decide, who decides? And does the decision maker, perhaps that it then folds within the board level or
executive committee in many cases.
Executive committee, yes.
So responsible, accountable. So responsible, where the R lands, is RChain is responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. So I think where responsibility falls, if we look at our charts, we have responsibility falling, let's see.
Not to interrupt your flow, but the executive committee would essentially be the C-level or VP level positions underneath the CEO/president of the organization.
I think that's the vision, yeah.
Yep, that's the vision. All right. Because I would imagine, in the future, should there be issue from the membership regarding the direction of the co-op, voices will be raised documents will be circulated. It should get the attention of the executive committee. It should get the consideration of the board, at which point decisions can be made. So that makes sense.
And then there are other documents, kind of why I was bringing up GP 001, for example, is that had, in my and you know, I think it may be too much to get into today, because I think I would encourage us to try to get somewhere with this document. And maybe that's our homework, is to look at GP 001 next, which was almost ratified by the board. But that, to follow that, for example, you know, in recent history, when the executive team was talking about putting the immersion license into an equity vehicle, for example, that
there was no executive team. I just want to point that out.
There was. It may have only had one member or whatever. I'm just saying, without getting into any of the particulars, I'm just saying operationally, something of that scale, I believe the language is clear enough that that kind of repackaging of assets in the organization becomes it measures up to something that membership would be involved in. And then if GP 001 is in effect to express the mechanism by which membership involvement occurs, then there would have been dialogue with governance committee and executive committee to contemplate that particular process. And so, and then I think honestly that was kind of, I think the prospect, because there was something like that going on, and I think the prospect of like having to institute a new committee that would butt heads with an executive team that was already committed to like that was just like too much to endure for anybody at the present you know, kind of level of maturity of the co-op, where we don't have the money and so on to pay people to chair committees and things like that. So, but in any case, that would be the process going forward. That kind of interaction between these bodies would be the process going forward once it's implemented, if we hold to this vision.
So, Rich, is that in that the bottom of the RChain? I put a question down there.
I have to move my screen around to try to see questions. A second.
Okay.
At the bottom. Oh, come on. What's the?
It's in the last.
Yeah, goods and services.
Yeah, goods and services. So, are you saying that? And what I had asked for were examples of such. Are you saying that the immersion license would have been an example of a procurement that would be reviewed or that the governance committee would have a responsibility for reviewing that?
I think whether it's here or reflected through the language of GP, that other document, GP 001, I think that particular transaction would have fallen under this purview, yes.
Yeah.
So, but again, it was as an umpire. So it wasn't necessarily to block an executive's initiative and right. With review by audit committee that, you know, because you know, some of our other conversations here have been about deal-making processes and, you know, and we had Rao on a call maybe a month ago, Rao, who has some expertise in risk assessment, talking about a structured kind of risk assessment when you go in to make a deal. You know, you want to have both. You want to have a vision of all the good things that might happen when you get involved in a deal, but you also want to be aware of, okay, well, those good things might happen, but if they don't, what's my risk that I'm exposing myself to? And so having a rigorous process, it wouldn't be the governance committee necessarily being the party that would engage that process, but it would be the governance committee that would see to it that the process was engaged by somebody, by the appropriate parties.
Right.
Right, it would make that connection. It would see the need, and I mean, an example here could even be like the policy of the executive having a cap on spending, you know, above which a certain amount would need you know, majority of board approval, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Right. And again, we're not looking at that document. It's not fresh in my mind, but there were particulars, or I think an attempt to set out particulars about to describe when these kind of instruments of the membership's governance would be involved, so that there was a de minimis. You know, there's a layer below where that's fine. You know, and I think, I don't know whether I'm accurate. I think, for example, the current executive has something like $10,000 or something, and a decision below that doesn't necessarily require other degrees of supervision. But if it is more material than that, then there are other processes that are spelled out, committees that should be assigned, and the governance committee is there at the next level of abstraction to make sure that that committee does its job and the thing gets observed the way it is supposed to be observed and the process is moving correctly without, and that's where it goes back to this thing that Bill brought up at the beginning, without necessarily having an executive function in the game. It's really managing the managers.
Yeah, your referee analogy is very, very helpful, Rich, I gotta say.
Great, cool.
It's playing a lot in my head as we talk through this.
Cool. Yeah, so, and then, you know, again, like it would be interesting, I could try to reflect on the philosophy that this particular expression of governance represents, or why members matter, you know, and then we're getting into questions about being a co-op instead of a corporation or whatever. But this, you know, at least my engagement with these processes and texts is a matter of it. I inherited them. That's what people seem to be working on when I showed up. So I'm trying to respect its, without asking the deeper questions, take this as something that people have looked at, chewed on, and so we can go with this. And then I guess the next thing is if we reach a final place with this documentation, the thing we need to know is, okay, well, how would we change it? And that's your second question, Bill, which is so pertinent, is how do we, you know, so governance takes on this role as it's all written out, and then either somebody messes up or turns out it, you know, there's a sentence that is missing, so it doesn't deal with a case.
Yeah, like
what are our processes?
If we use your example of the ball game, right? A play takes place, and there wasn't a referee that saw what happened.
Right.
Then people are upset, right? And they're saying, "Well, how the hell do we move forward now?"
And I guess, well, I'm talking a lot. Does anybody else want to offer a comment here? I'll play the conversation out and say, well, that might be the membership meeting, you know, and other kinds of membership processes, which is another whole kettle of fish. Because once we get this done and we have something in place, then we can start to have conversation. Well, we do have a membership meeting. I think we might be time to look at our agenda and move down. But, you know, there's a notion that came out of one of the special meeting sessions, which was Steve Ross Talbot saying, you know, an organization that he's involved in, they have quarterly meetings, quarterly membership engagement because a year is too long. So that you know, that might be another way. If things aren't done right here, then either through a board resolution or an item of business coming from the membership could refine and review what the governance processes are. So, does anybody have a suggestion for where we take this document for now? I kind of want to look at it. I'm going to try to pull the agenda up so I can see what else we're hoping to talk about today. And if anybody wants to throw something out.
Well, I'll just give a quick update that on Steve Ross Talbot. I did reach out to him as requested. Steve and I did connect via LinkedIn, and he's asking for he and I to have a conversation at some point on Monday of next week.
Okay.
I think what he's wanting to do is I get that he's wanting to get further understanding of, you know, who we currently have on staff and what their functions are.
Mm. I did not connect with Evan Jensen. To be honest, I've got other projects going on, and so I feel like I'm barely able to meet my own standards for participation, and I would love to like have a volunteer take on facilitation next week, for example. Because if I didn't get around to reaching out to Evan till this morning, and I know Jim kind of wanted me to. I don't know where the conversations are, but the idea of Evan maybe helping audit finance, although I don't know if Evan necessarily has the financial background to be a qualified. There's an SEC regulation that requires an audit and finance expert to be a member of the organization. Mark Pui met that qualification. I could probably meet it on paper, but I'd really want to have, I don't know why I'm even bringing myself into it. Never mind, I'm not available. But I'm not sure that Evan has that background. Ideally, someone who has, you know, worked as a CFO or CPA, you know, or has some pretty. Bill, I don't know. Maybe that's something you could.
No, I don't have those qualifications.
Yeah. So anyway, that's another. Anyway, that's another thing. Do we have a volunteer for next week? Because I'll be de minimis. I can show up with an agenda, but you're not going to get much more out of me than that. And so I'll going once, going twice. Okay, people. Daryl, are you in there?
Well, I mean, I don't know if I'm qualified, but I'll
to facilitate a meeting better than you've watched me do today. I think you can do it, buddy.
Well, I can take a kick at the can if you'd like. I'm happy to try. I'm happy to try.
Okay. I will commit to being present, and I'll laugh at you gently.
Okay. I have one thought about the ways of working section of the governance committee charter.
Cool.
Just one thing that I could anticipate as being kind of prickly from the executive is the whole kind of timing of things. I think that in this day and age of tech companies and working agilely, sometimes decisions have to be made pretty quickly. And if a lot of decisions have to go through a lot of bureaucracy, then perhaps things won't work as function as stealthily as they could. I could just see that being kind of a prickly issue. So I think anything we can provide that would kind of help create a structure for quick decisions, I think might be requested.
Is there a particular location in the text that you're referring to, a particular statement or something?
Well, going through the kind of ways of working, the process of having unanimous consent, the process of meeting no more than twice a month. There might be a situation where a decision needs to be made all of a sudden. You know, like thinking back to the immersion thing, you know, one thing I do know that the immersion guys did is they kind of dropped this kind of pressure bomb on Greg saying, you know, we have someone else who's going to sign, you know, the classic, you know, someone else is going to buy this, you know. And so Greg felt pressure to act quickly. And I think that contributed to the poor decision being made. We didn't do enough due diligence, yada, yada. So I think that if this is going to function well, where there's another body that's an umpire that you know, can review some important decisions that have to be made, I think we have to kind of provide the ability to act quickly.
Does anyone want to respond to that?
Well,
You could reduce the quorum.
I think in that first paragraph, I was thinking about that a little bit too, where it says, you know, the team is expected to define and agree to its own internal ways of working. I think that if we're looking at this group of referees to ref the game appropriately, maybe there needs to be some stronger definition of or clarity for the membership's sake to see something here. I'm not sure what it is, Rich. I just know that when I read through that statement, I was just kind of like, okay, they're not accounts, you know. So when I put it all together, when I go back all the way up to the top and I think about, okay, they're not they advise, they recommend, they propose, they're accountable for their own performance. They're not going to measure others' performance, and now they're going to define to agree to their own internal ways of working. I guess maybe it's the transparency part of things. When I think about the co-op, is like, okay, if this body is so important, can they describe a little bit more about how they're going to go about things for the benefit of the membership? I don't know if that ties with where Daryl's at, but that's my thought.
Yeah, I think it ties.
Anybody else want to comment on the points Daryl raised? I mean, part of my response to Daryl, or to you, Daryl, is that again, the governance committee took it ideally, or in operation, would take itself out of the executive functions. You'd have an executive committee or team and deal-making processes elsewhere. So, you know, you might have a quick, I'm just trying to think of when you would urgently need the governance committee to come in and review the rule book, you know, because again, that's been delegated elsewhere as long as there is a rule book. And, you know, the counterpoint to the assertion that, you know, it's software and you got to move fast is that, holy smokes, maybe we moved too fast a few times in the last 2 years, and we would have exposed ourselves to less risk if we had more due diligence. And so I think trying to find a balance between those two perspectives, could end up working.
Yeah, I agree. So I'm just curious, like, what would a hypothetical be? Let's, if I could, can we do a little thought experiment? Like, could we imagine what would have happened if this governance committee existed and was set up and was functioning when the immersion deal came down? How would things have gone down differently?
Well, in my time, which is just after that, so I can't really speak, and maybe others can, but that particular case, like, to use too much historical detail, I mean, I know there was an executive committee at one point. Then there was an attempt to reassert an executive committee that never really got off the ground, this most recently. So I don't know if there'd been an executive committee. I think also part of it, I mean, was there ever an a functioning executive committee, Ian? Or?
Yeah, there was. That was chaired by Greg, which is usually the way you do it. President chairs the executive committee.
Who was on the executive committee?
Myself, I think Rao was on there, Renal, Jacob, Basiri. I think we had some other people from Reflective as well. And it was fairly effective. Oh, Evan was on there for sure.
Was it there? Because I always heard it was the board that approved terms, and I'm not making this problematic. I was a giant, just let the record show, I was a fan of the immersion deal. I came in after it. I thought it was fascinating and amazing. But just going operationally, I didn't know, was the executive committee involved in that particular transaction? Because all of the commentary that I heard was that it had to do with the board and not the executive committee. So I don't know if we can't say, well, the executive committee existed and then this deal, so that deal happened. I don't think we can make that logical assertion. Can we?
I don't think executive committee was functioning at that time.
Right.
And as Daryl said, it was brought to the board very quickly. I mean, it was rushed. It was kind of all or nothing, do or die, now or never.
So I guess I would say that, I mean, I think that as these documents are contemplated, there would have been more hands involved, more eyes involved, and it might have gone a little slower.
Yeah, because here's a point I could make is that in Berlin, I remember seeing it was Ian Bloom talking with Ian from H3 Uni. I can't remember Ian's last name now, but Ian was quite knowledgeable about high definition audio and the various formats that were out there, competing technologies that were out there, and he was quite skeptical about the whole thing. If there was an opportunity for that kind of healthy skepticism to go through its due diligence, then perhaps we may have averted something there. So the question is, would this governance committee, in the way it's being laid out here, would it have been able to do that, I guess, is the question I have.
Well, and I'm responding to say that's not the governance committee's job. That would be the executive committee's job to have to
I
have more eyes involved, more than just one person putting the structure of the deal together and making both the case for the upside as well as the case for the risk assessment.
I see.
All
Okay.
of that, I mean, I think that the other documents, not necessarily what's here in the governance committee document, but when you have following IOB4 and its expression in GP001, and then there is an appendix to this document which is called the governance landscape, which I think what the thing to do is, maybe since you committed to this, Daryl, for next week, you and I could be in dialogue, and we'll try to get all of these different components in one place so that it's possible for people to kind of get the whole picture of how this thing is put together. But I'm saying that there is a description of an executive committee. It's diagrammed out in this thing called the governance landscape. And so you would have had a kind of a forum for due diligence. And I guess instead of just looking back at that case, you would have it going forward. You would have, and so audit committee, for example, audit committee, I made the case in the special meeting documents that, there are different functions. Like because somebody was saying, oh, the audit committee could be the part of the deal making committee, out there looking for deals. But that's not, the audit committee needs to be very skeptical and particular, very conservative, and produce a risk assessment of, if this doesn't go wrong, is everything done correctly, and how are we minimizing our exposure if things don't work out as planned? That's a very different sort of set of faculties and disciplines than having the intuition for amazing opportunities that might be out there for the organization. And so to try to have, make it a bicameral situation where you've got both faculties providing due diligence on strategy for the organization going forward, that's, I guess, if we, that's the way I would make an argument with anyone about why this makes sense.
Okay, so I recall Ian saying something to the effect that we need to set up the governance committee before we can set up other committees, in the sense that the governance committee kind of is the body that kind of helps form the other ones. Does that include the executive committee?
That would make sense, yeah.
Okay. So the governance committee helps define the executive committee or the structures of it, or?
Let's see, down in the appendices here, I think is, I've got on the wrong document. Where are we here? It's agenda notes, here we go.
I think to help create the charters for those committees and their policies. And Rao joined, welcome.
Hello, Rao.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. I was not by my phone, and I saw your thing just a minute ago. Sorry, my apologies. My mom had surgery today. I was kind of busy with dealing with all of that. So, but
hope it went well.
yeah, everything went well. So we got her back home, and I was kind of busy with working through all of that.
I think we were about to.
You're probably about to wrap up.
Yeah, it's good to hear from you. It's good to know you're out there. Do you have any news for the folks here about, or thoughts about? We've been. You can review the recording, but we've been talking about different kind of operational cases, some thought experiments about the governance committee charter. It seems like people like this metaphor of it being the rule book for umpires. So we're not playing the game, but we're the umpires, or the governance committee with the umpires. And so
And if we are the umpires, the players of the different committees, or who are the players?
would be the executive functions, and in some cases committees.
Okay.
But the executive committee would be handling most of the plays, or staff people that are assigned to specific tasks. But that's keying off of, we spent some time looking at the particular sentence of the team has no operational accountability for executive functional decisions or judgments, but by exception may review governance decisions or disputes as part of an audit or extraordinary appeal requested by the executive or by an approved member petition.
Right. But I mean, basically, I guess the question I have is who has the liability? And presumably the board members do, because we have insurance coverage for the, right? Who else has insurance coverage? Because essentially those are the guys that are supposed to execute. And my secondary question on that is who is monitoring if they are executing correctly or not? I mean, and I don't know if that's not, I mean, to me, that seems like a governance function, but I don't know if the way the charters and the principles are written down, if it boils down to that, or are we saying governance basically is advisory and is going to look at whatever they look at per the written down rules. But then the guys that have the insurance coverage are really the ones that are taking actions that might or might not put the whole entity at risk.
Right. So the co-op has D&O insurance for its directors and officers. So those are the ones that execute on the recommendations of the committee.
Okay. So here is the thing then. So the D&O is covering the individuals from bad results, right? And who is covering the co-op from bad results, or who is protecting bad results? Meaning the D&O is there so that the particular individual doesn't go to jail or doesn't go to financial ruin, which is fine, which is needed. But then if those members that are covered by the D&O do something that destroys the co-op or reduces the value of the co-op or something, where do we go?
I mean, it's all.
Right now, it would just go to the either special meeting or the annual meeting where those officers or directors could be unseated.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's consistent with what I was aware of. Rich, you had another angle on that, or?
I was going to say something about the ultimate responsibility rests with the members. There are some codes of conduct, I think, elsewhere.
Yeah, there's a petition to remove a board member that can be initiated by members. I think that's in the bylaws as well.
Right, and then into does the petition also call for a special meeting, I guess, to removal of a board member?
I believe so. I think so.
Okay. So, I mean, basically, I just want to highlight what the remedies are relative to the occurrence of a risk in time, right? Basically, the remedies for the co-op are such that a risk may occur, and then basically what I would say a drastic action needs to be taken by the co-op to correct or recover from that. And there is not a any guarantee of 100% recovery from that for the co-op overall. And the reason I'm saying all this is to say that this is where really governance comes in, is to prevent those kind of, where we get into a situation where basically the individual may be punished through being removed from the board or something like that, but the co-op itself really does not have any necessary guarantee of recovery from the actions of those individuals. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I feel it kind of just pressing against, you know, at a certain point, it's just pressing against nature and risk. I mean, you know, ultimately like, for example, the membership will, you know, very important responsibility of the membership is maintaining the platform under the RChain improvement process. And it may be that a technical decision is made and a certain pathway is followed on behalf of the co-op that ends up not, not being as fruitful as some other pathway. And that's, you know, all one can really expect for all participants is that they do their best with the information they have available. I mean, there may be particular cases where you find out that somebody is double dealing or doing something criminal or misrepresenting, you know, or behaving in any number of bad ways, but, and then there are processes for that. But at a certain point, you know, accountability is tested in the market, you know, is this, you know, so we all suffer together if we make if the collective makes a bad turn. That's just part of the
right
process.
Right. So I mean, I guess the one mechanism that the governance board has in terms of reducing risk a priori as opposed to reacting to post-risk or a post-risk event is probably that we communicate to and let the members or keep the members in the know that, look, we see this as a potential risk. Here is what we're recommending. Here is what we see going on. Right. And we think that this may lead to XYZ consequences for the co-op. I think that communication is probably what might then precipitate potential actions by the co-op ahead of time, if need be, in some cases. And, you know, maybe in most cases not, but at least it would put pressure on the bad actors, quote unquote, if there is such a thing, and for them to explain themselves or correct themselves. Because we basically have to act as not just as, but as a dynamic governing mechanism, you know, like what they call in the engineering sense, like a governor in the in a mechanical or electromechanical sense. I think we need to figure out or keep that concept in front of us to say, are we effectively playing that risk mitigation role, and what a given situation to be in that mode, I think.
I want to say two things, which are one that, so it's fairly clear in the language that there's an observer function. So governance committee members are seated and observing other committees so that there's some intelligence coming about potential scenarios or cases or risk factors. And then also in our ways of working, and before you joined the call, we were kind of looking at ways of working and trying to sharpen that up so members understood the processes, and there was some clear language there. And so if these meetings are transparent, predictable, with clear operations stated for the members, that's another way. That transparency is a way would be a mechanism, a governance mechanism like you described. So something's happening in the audit committee, somebody's talking about some risk or some different pathways. that information can come back, and there's an observer in governance to go, hey, maybe maybe as governance we need attention over here, and that's a way for it to get, eventually it trickles back to membership, in a kind of digested and intelligent form.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Ian, or whoever is talking. Bill's on, I think.
It's Bill. Yeah, Rich, I think that's a good way of describing that. So if we took a case as an example, say there was going to be a major purchase of something, and it fell under such that the Audits and Finance Committee needed to review the terms of the deal, then the Governance Committee would just make sure, would have an observation responsibility at least to say, okay, is this following the protocol?
Correct.
That needs to be in place. And then regardless of how the deal shakes out, the Governance Committee would essentially publish a report that perhaps the members could then see that would show, okay, yes, they followed the protocol, or no, they didn't follow the protocol.
Right.
Does that sound about right?
Right. Yeah. If there's a problem, if protocol isn't followed, then yeah, governance has a role to play right there. And then on the other side, governance, we're trying to get at the place where there's a protocol for how you put the protocol in place. How is member sentiment expressed, so that protocols are due diligence is taken with respect to establishing those protocols, and they're intelligent, and they're, in the case where Daryl brought up, well, is it now going too slow to actually perform business? Well, that would be a parameter on the protocol. It can't be too slow to impede business. That would not be a fair expression of member sentiment. Members want to be participating in something that's successful. So both it's the creation of the protocol now, and then handing it off to the players. The umpires or the rulemaking committee hands it off to the players, and they play the game. And then there's watching that the protocol is implemented properly, and when necessary, reviewing that what was the protocol followed, and if not, here's where we've identified that it was not followed, and then perhaps reporting back suggestions of actions to be taken by parts of the organization that make those actions. It's spelled out in other protocol.
Yep, that's good. Thanks.
All right, guys. I feel like we've done a lot of progress. I'm looking forward to reviewing this tape, this recording. I think we should continue. I think maybe if we try to bang on this for another week, we can get into a final form. I encourage you all to go carefully through this. Daryl, you're with me, right? We're gonna get this document to these people, all the other components?
I'm in.
Okay, brother. So we'll communicate in the governance channel for that. I think that's our business for now. Oh, one other. Some people, I think if we've got Steve Ross Talbot being interested, I'm ready to consider trying to meet at 9 a.m. instead of 6 p.m. What's the sentiment of the people here for that?
Which day is this, if we can get Steve?
Thursday. I think there's a gap in the calendar. It would be 9 a.m. Pacific instead of 3 p.m. Pacific.
I can do 9.
Okay.
And I'm okay with that for now. I don't know what the future would be. So for now,
Okay.
I'm okay with that.
Okay.
I'm good too. Bill and I have a meeting following that, so we'd only have an hour.
Okay. Yeah, and
And,
I think the room is available for that hour. I think there's another there might be sometimes a DAP meeting or something.
And so it looks like Steve Henley just joined.
Hi, Steve.
No, he just got home safe.
Oh,
He was here at the beginning.
oh, I see.
Okay, so I'm sure that increases the chance that Steve Ross Talbot could participate if he wants to, because it'll be in the afternoon instead of the late evening. So are we good?
Yeah,
Anything else to add?
So in the governance channel, if we're going to change that time, that's where you'll post it.
Yeah, Ian, I'll send you a note. I'll look at the calendar right after we break and make sure that it's open on the calendar.
Okay, I'll put it in the public calendar too. If we
Great.
And I have one question. I mean, it seems like so far we're working on this charter and things like that. But as far as the preparations for the October elections and working backwards, was that discussed, or is that?
No, we had your name next to that, Raul. And then you came in at 5 o'clock.
I did commit to help in that area.
No, you didn't. You didn't commit. That's true. But you did mention it, and so I put your name by it.
Right. No,
but let's. Yeah.
Is that somewhere on the agenda in one of the upcoming meetings to say?
Let's make sure that it is, and let's. And again, there's no reason why the governance channel on Discord can't be just sort of an open area of discussion.
Sure.
But yeah, I think it'd be terrific, Rao, because you've mentioned that a couple times. If you help press that topic, because we really need to. I think your suggestion is pertinent to.
Yeah, because I think that's basically deadline driven. The rest of this stuff is, even though they're important, there's no urgent deadline or whatever. But I think Ian and Diane and a few others were the ones that were working that process with the elections last time. And I think we need to think about to pull in that expertise, whether that needs to be a separate subcommittee or subgroup or whatever that's working on it, or do we form X number of people out of this into that? I guess those are all things to think about, unless somebody has...
There is a nominating committee, which as it stands right now, Deanna is still the chair. And the members, if I'm remembering, I think Jacob Basiri, I think Jason Plepel are on that committee, but the committee hasn't met since before the last annual meeting, so they're really not functioning. And I'm not sure what they have in the way of a charter.
So Rao, let's plan to take some minutes with our session next Thursday morning, and then until then we can be in communication on the governance channel, and we can probe. I mean, I've been in touch with. I mean, Deanna and Jacob Basari anyway are still nearby. If they want to participate, they might have an opportunity. So we can work with that and bring it together for next week.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right. If there's no other business, we'll be in touch soon and see you next week. All right. Thank you.
All right. See you.
See you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.